Thank you everyone for joining the webinar on landmark data copy. So today we're going to be discussing how to copy landmark application product lines. So the content from this webinar is mostly from an existing Infor document that you can find on the Infor Extreme website. You have to search for it pretty specifically in order to find a specific document, but I've posted the title here, so it should be easy to search for. So it's called the Infor Landmark Technology Server Setup and Maintenance Guide. There may be a more updated version of this, but this is the one that I use every day. And the chapter you want is chapter 19, which is towards the end, copying Infor Landmark technology application data. So it's pretty obvious that that is the solution to what you've probably been looking for, but there are some gotchas, and it can be a daunting task for first timers. And I wanted to go ahead and make sure that you have had a chance to kind of look at some of the different scenarios and explain some of those things that you might find in this document that may not make a whole lot of sense to you. And then I want to show you at the end a quick guide that can guide you through the process. And before I start, I was really hoping to kind of get a idea of have you or have you not performed a landmark data copy. So I'm going to go ahead and start a poll in just a second, and if you don't mind going ahead and answering that. Okay, so you should see a survey on your screen. Okay, I think that's about all the people that are probably going to vote. So 68% of you have said that, well, 65% said that you have not, and 35% of you have. And hopefully we both groups will get something out of this webinar. We're going to try a slightly different format today than what you're used to with our webinars. We usually have a QA session at the end of the webinar. And today, instead, we're going to try something different. As you know, all our webinars are posted to our site at nogalis.com, and they're also posted to our YouTube channel. So what we're going to ask is that you save your questions for the YouTube channel when we post, and you can use the comment section of the YouTube video to post your questions, and we'll be sure to answer those as quickly as possible. I'll have notifications set up for that at least the next week or so that if you have any questions, we can post answers to those right away. So I'm going to close this poll. The end result was 36% have and 64% have not done a landmark data copy. So we're talking about landmark application product line data copies, okay? All right, so we're going to keep going here. So what is a landmark data copy? So we're talking about the application itself doing a data copy. So for example, let's say you have the LTM application installed and you want to copy that whole product line data to another environment. So that could be done for refreshing your test product line from your production data, or upgrading to a newer version. Maybe you're moving it to a new server to do that upgrade. You're doing all kinds of different testing and whatnot. And it essentially will copy your application data some user data, identities, and security and whatnot that's included within your application product line. So the question is, if you're new to Landmark, which a lot of you probably are relatively new to Landmark because most of our attendees for our webinars are LSF customers. If you're new to Landmark, you're wondering, can I just copy the product line like I do in LSF? Well, in the LSF world, product line copies are relatively easy. So you're just copying the source file, the metadata, configuration files, and the database essentially. So the official way, I think, is doing a data dump and a data load. But I think most customers, especially those on Windows, are now used to just copying the database in the back over to this other, the destination product line database, doing a couple of things in between. And within, let's say, an hour or so, you can get your product line copy done. Maybe it takes you a little longer, depending on the size of data you have. It could take a few hours. But in the Landmark world, things are a little bit more complicated. So I think this specific slide, let me see if did I skip one? Oh, I haven't. Okay, so in the Landmark world, you have essentially identity data and actor data and whatnot that's also baked into your product line data. So you can't just say, let me copy this whole database. In addition to that, the data, a lot of it is encrypted within the database, so moving it over isn't exactly a simple task. So you can't just copy the database in the back end. Now, some people may have figured out how to copy certain tables, and there are shortcuts out there, but the only tried and true way really is the method that Infor outlines in that document that I mentioned earlier, which again, you can download from the Infor Extreme website. So what are some of the requirements for doing this? So Infor tells you, and it is more or less the case every time, that everything has to be on the same version where you're copying from and where you're copying to. Now we're talking about your operating system should be the same operating system, obviously the same version. And then your Landmark environment version and your Landmark application version should be the same. HTTP protocols, your LSF environment versions, and your application versions, everything should really be kind of the same environment when you're doing the Landmark data copy. Okay, so there are 3 different scenarios outlined in that document that I pointed out earlier. And those 3 scenarios address the 3 different ways you could potentially be dealing with this data copy. So the simplest possible way is a standalone scenario. So this is a standalone Landmark application server that is just serving the one application. It isn't connected to another LSF application. So this could be, let's say, an LTM application, product line that the customer is using to run LTM only, not necessarily at all connected to an LSF box. Even if they have one, maybe they just haven't, they don't have the 2 communicating at all. So in that scenario, you're essentially only worried about copying your Landmark data over, and there's no consideration for LSF. And in the next scenario, you have the connected scenario. So this is where there is a connection to LSF, but not because of an ISS federation. So this could be in terms of like supply chain, or you just have essentially an LSF server and a Landmark server that are connected, but not from a federation standpoint. And the last scenario is a federated scenario. So you have a Landmark and an LSF environment that have been federated through ISS federation. So these are the 3 different scenarios. And in each scenario, there's some slightly different things to consider. So let's first talk about this, the standalone scenario. So the standalone scenario is, like I said, the simplest one. So you verify the database actors and identities on the landmark server. Then you sync your encryption keys, and the directions for all of this are inside that document, and I'll go over them a little later. I'll show you a quick way to get all this information. Then you export your data and your identities, and there are utilities for that within Landmark. And then on the destination side, you do an import. Now, this is after you've ran your encryption synchronization, which you only really need to do the very first time you do this data copy, because once you've synchronized the encryption keys, you don't need to do it again on the second copy. So if you do a copy again, you don't have to do that a second time. So then you, after the export, you do your data import, you load the identities and assignments, and then you verify the system. So relatively simple. It can still get very complex, and it can take a very long time depending on how much data you have. But this is obviously the simplest scenario. So the next scenario is the connected scenario. So this is not with federation, but really the difference is kind of subtle. So this is a Landmark data copy with a connected set of LSF and Landmark servers that have not been federated through ISS federation. And here you verify databases, actors, and identities like you did before, and there are steps for how to verify them. And usually there can be some errors and warnings and whatnot that come out of those, and there are ways to resolve those before you get going. And you want to make sure you've gone through and done all that cleanup work before you start, because you can hit some issues going forward. So in this connected scenario, you want to go ahead and do your LSF product line copy. And we're not going to cover the LSF product line copy in this webinar, but there's plenty of documentation on how to do that, and it's relatively easy here. You want to make sure you're just copying the LSF product line, not obviously gen. And there are some utilities that go along with that, and you can do that by also copying the LSF database in the back end, or you can just use the Lawson utilities for doing it. Then you just like before, you sync the encryption keys. Again, utilities out there for doing that. We'll review real quick. And then export your data and identities like before, import them and import your identities. And then here you manually set up your LSF users, or you can use LSF IQ to do that. And then you verify your system. And one thing to note here is that Landmark, in this case, is the primary authentication system. Again, these are connected, but not through ISS federation. And the services and endpoints are not changed or overwritten in the destination because this process doesn't overwrite those things. So they still remain connected. And then the final scenario is the Landmark data copy for federated instances. So you've got a federated LSF and Landmark set of environments, and you want to do copy from one to another environment. Here, you do that first step is always the same. You verify your databases, actors, and identities. Again, utilities out there for that. You still do your LSF product line copy just like before. You sync the encryption keys, export your data and identities, import the data, load your identities and assignments, manually set up the LSF users. Again, you can use LSF IQ here, and then you verify your system. The primary thing to consider here, remember, is in this case, since they're federated, we're talking about a scenario where LSF has a primary authentication. And again, the destination environments remain federated because the ISS configuration parameters and data are not overwritten by the work that we're doing here. So some things to consider when you're doing a landmark data copy, or a landmark application product line data copy, I should say, is one, you can consider trimming your data before you start. So things like work unit data and W effectivity and those tables can get quite large. And we're talking about in several gigabytes large in some cases, and that could be the difference between this process taking 6 hours versus this process taking 18 hours. And it can actually have other implications too, because there's memory considerations to think about, and we'll look at that in just a second. And you really want to make sure that if there is data that you can trim that you don't really need in that destination set of environment, that you do that prior to starting. Backups, obviously, this is a pretty intense process of change. So once you've done this data copy into the destination environment, you've essentially changed that product line that you're moving to. So it's a great idea to do a backup. I recommend a backup of the source and the destination, because if you type the wrong command into the wrong box, you could ruin the whole thing. And it can get very confusing because you're dealing with two different environments that may even be using the same product line name. So, and it is a long and drawn out process, including many commands that you have to type along the way. So mistakes are common. I definitely recommend taking some good backups. Obviously, here you want to consider whether or not you're dealing with a federated system, or if you're not dealing with a federated system. You want to have your testing scenarios, whatever they are, outlined beforehand, and you want to be able to run some smoke tests right afterwards, because this process can fail. There are multiple failure points, and you want to make sure that you can test things afterwards and make sure that you're in good shape before you move it over to your users. The runtime, another thing you want to consider. We've done landmark application product line data copies that have taken 18 hours before. So you want to make sure that what you're planning on doing over a cutover weekend or something like that, you've got enough time to do that. And that goes without saying, but you can really underestimate how long this process can take. Then there are memory considerations that you should keep in mind. The DA import and DA export utilities in Landmark do write everything to memory, so that can really be a hindrance if you've got more data than memory allocated to these utilities. So one of the clever things you want to do ahead of time is try to increase the memory size, and I'll show you where you do that in a second. Or you'd have to split them up into different number of files, which is also a great way of doing this. But you might actually consider doing both so that the import and export utilities don't fail. And then, so we'll go over this copy tool in just a second. So this is a screenshot of the DA export.bat and the DA import.bat. And as you can see, I've highlighted the little area in a red rectangle here, where you can change the size of the memory that's allocated to each one of these utilities. You can change that to suit your export and import, and then maybe change it back after you're done. These are, I believe, the values that are kind of shipped with a landmark install, the original values. So 2 megabytes and 3 megabytes aren't exactly, actually 2 gigabytes and 3 gigabytes aren't exactly large when you're considering a large application product line. So that's something you may want to consider, maybe bumping that up to 12 or something like that for what you need. So we've been through this process enough that we thought, it would be worthwhile creating a little wizard that would walk us through it, because there are so many commands and there are so many things that can go wrong, and so many chances for you to make a mistake. So I want to share my screen real quick and show you. Let's see here. I want to make sure I'm picking the right screen. All right, you should all be seeing my screen here. So I will be posting this URL to our site under this webinar. It'll also be posted to the YouTube video. You can try to write it down now. And we'll actually have a link posted under products here. It is not really a product. This is just a free wizard you can use. But it'll be listed underneath here after, let's say, maybe by tomorrow. But you can write this URL down now, and you can go to it now. It's nogalis.com/LMKCP, like landmark copy, /copier.html. So I'll just walk through this and tell you what it does real quick. It's a quick and simple form. So let's say we want to perform a landmark data copy from one product line to another. And I'm going to call this, like, whatever I'm going to want to remember later. So today's date is 10/26. So you can name it whatever you want. I just kind of like this idea of naming it with the date. I'm going to go with the standalone scenario just to keep it simple. And then how is this data? This is within the same environment or within two different environments. So each one of these options you're selecting here will make a difference in the outcome of what you have to do. Do you need to synchronize the keys? Yes or no. They were previously synced. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And my source host name is lmkprod.nogalis.com. Let's say the port, we'll just keep that the way it is. Is this an SSL port? Let's say yes. Are you let's say that the security utilities are password protected, and we'll just say, password 123 here, and password 123 here for the destination password. And let's say my source product line is LTM prod, and my destination product line is LTM, test. How's that? So I've gone ahead and filled this out, and you saw how easy that was to fill out. There's no trick questions. You should know the answer to all of these things before you start your process anyway, so it kind of helps with that. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit go. Sorry about that. Now it's going to walk me through what I have to do. I can expand these sections if I want more explanation of what every one of these little sections are. But I've tried to hide as much as I can, so you don't have to be reading through all this every time. So this is more or less what the document would have walked you through. And then every one of your commands now is tailored to the values you entered. So as you can see, the highlighted commands are the things that you entered on the form. So all of these different values, and it tells you where to type these in, like which server, destination, or source. So you basically go through all of this, and there's little copy buttons next to each one of these, so you can click it, and that copies that line, so you can copy and paste. And if that's not enough, and if you would just want to download this in more of a scripted format, you can just click download. And I'm going to go ahead and save this to my desktop for a second. It's just a text file. And when you open that text file, you'll see on the source and on the destination. You still don't want to just script this and have it run end to end, because it doesn't make sense to do that. You have to copy files back and forth, right? You have to, when you take these exports, you have to move them over to the other server to do your imports and whatnot. All the directions are in here, but you want to, so you want to make sure you're kind of still going through it by step. I don't recommend scripting this out. I would suggest downloading this, but then also kind of still going through this document step by step and reading this. Please do not just blindly trust what this tells you. You could have typed something in wrong. You could have, we could have an error in here. I'll just be very frank. This is a relatively new wizard that we put together. I don't want to bear the responsibility of you screwing up your landmark product line. This is just a tool for you to kind of expedite the process and have less doubt about what you're doing. It is certainly something you should verify as you're going along. It's something we've developed for ourselves in-house and we're using, and it's helpful for someone like me. If I've got a few things going on at the same time, if I get distracted through this 6 or 7 hour process, I'll know where I left off. I don't have to remember what I set things to. I can just come back and find out what the next command is that I have to do and continue from there. And those different scenarios that you saw in the previous page in that form would change what you see on the screen. So there'll be certain sections that are here and certain sections that are not here, depending on the selections you made on that previous screen. So I hope this helps. Again, this is nogalis.com/lmkcp, like landmark copy, /copier.html. And the output of that will obviously be output.html, but you can then go in here and hit the copy buttons on each one of these lines, or click that download button at the very bottom to go ahead and use this. Someone's asked if I could paste this link to the chat session. I will do that just now. So if I go back to the chat session, here you go. There's the link. So you should have that. Again, that link will be posted to our site, and the link will be posted to the YouTube video as well. And it will also be under the products section of our site. If you haven't been to our site before, this is it. You can, the product section underneath that, that's where it will be. There's also a link to LSFIQ here. You can use that. There's a free version of that you can use for all your security needs. So when it comes to copying your users and whatnot, that is something you can leverage. And again, it's available to you for free in kind of a limited release. Then the webinars are always available under the education section. So when you go back here, this is the one you're on right now. So it'll be shortly posted down here where this Amazon AWS one is. This one will be shifted over, and that'll be right there. Plus, it'll be up here for some time. And they're also on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com/C, like lowercase c as in Charlie, for channel /Nogalis, that's it. You'll be able to see all our past webinars here, and you can keep going basically. And it'll be here. So for this webinar, we're going to hold all questions for the video comments. So once you go on the video, you'll be able to leave your questions as a comment on the video. We look forward to seeing them there and answering them, hearing your feedback regarding the copier wizard, and hearing your feedback about the webinar itself. And if you have any other suggestions or questions and whatnot, we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to wrap up the recording for this webinar right now, and we look forward to seeing your questions on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining.